September 26, 1983. A Soviet officer sat alone in a bunker, staring at a screen that showed 5 American nuclear missiles heading toward Moscow. He had less than 5 minutes to decide. If he reported the attack, Soviet nuclear protocol would launch everything. Every warhead, every city in America would burn, and then America would respond. In 20 minutes, human civilization would have ended. The world as we know it hung on one man's decision. His name was Stanislav Petrov, and what he did next saved your life. Nuclear annihilation averted. But this wasn't the only time. Throughout history, we have come terrifyingly close to extinction. Moments where a single wrong choice, a technical glitch, or a miscommunication nearly ended everything. And the most frightening part, most people have never heard these stories. Today, we're going to explore the times humanity stood at the edge of oblivion. I do not know with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. Let's begin. Petrov's choice. Stanislav Petrov wasn't supposed to be on duty that night. He was filling in for a sick colleague. At 12:14 a.m., the alarm blared. The Soviet early warning system detected one American Eichbomb heading toward the USSR, then a second, then a third. Within minutes, 5 missiles were allegedly in the air. The computer was screaming nuclear war had begun. Protocol was clear. Report to superiors immediately. They would launch a retaliatory strike. Petrov had been trained his entire career for this moment, but something felt wrong. Why would America attack with only 5 missiles? A real first strike would involve hundreds, maybe thousands, and the satellites were new, untested. Doubt, against every protocol, against his training, against the screaming alarms, Petrov picked up the phone and reported a system malfunction. He had no proof. He was betting his life, his country, and the entire world on a gut feeling. The minutes that followed were the longest of his life. If he was wrong, Moscow would be ash before the counterattack could launch. I had a funny feeling in my gut. I didn't want to be the one responsible for starting World War III. He was right. The system had malfunctioned. Sunlight reflecting off clouds had fooled the satellites. But here's what haunts historians about this moment. Seconds to doom. What if someone else had been on duty? Someone who followed protocol. We came within minutes of nuclear holocaust because one man trusted his instincts over a machine. But Petrov's story wasn't unique. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine was being depth-charged by American destroyers. The captain, believing war had started, wanted to launch a nuclear torpedo. The submarine was running out of air, and the crew was suffocating. Launching required agreement from 3 officers. 2 said yes. 1 man said no. His name was Vasily Arkhipov. If he had agreed, the torpedo would have vaporized the American fleet. And then, mutually assured destruction. If this revelation about how close we came is changing your perspective, hit like and subscribe for more hidden history that shaped our world, because what comes next will shock you even more. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a terrifying pattern. Between 1950 and 1980, there were over a dozen documented close calls, accidents with nuclear weapons, computer glitches, miscommunications. Each one could have ended civilization. And these are just the ones we know about. Classified files are still being declassified decades later, revealing new near misses. The Demon Core. Not every close call came from geopolitics. Sometimes, the threat came from the weapons themselves. In Los Alamos after World War II, scientists worked with a plutonium sphere that would come to be known as the Demon Core. It had been intended for a 3rd atomic bomb, never dropped on Japan. Instead, it killed 2 scientists, and could have done so much worse. In August 1945, physicist Harry Daghlian was alone in the lab, stacking tungsten carbide bricks around the core to study its properties. He accidentally dropped a brick onto the sphere. The room filled with blue light, a criticality accident. He received a lethal dose of radiation and died 25 days later in agony. 9 months later, physicist Louis Slotin was demonstrating the same core to colleagues. He was using a screwdriver to hold two beryllium hemispheres apart. The screwdriver slipped. Blue flash. Slotnin instinctively knocked the hemispheres apart with his bare hands, absorbing the fatal dose but saving the others in the room. He died 9 days later. The blue flash was the last thing I remember clearly. The demon core was eventually melted down, but its lesson remains. Nuclear technology doesn't forgive mistakes, and we've made many more since then. Broken arrows. The U.S. military has a code name for accidents involving nuclear weapons. They call them broken arrows. The official count since 1950 is 32. 32 times American nuclear weapons were lost, damaged, or accidentally deployed. Lost nuclear bombs. In 1958, a B-47 bomber accidentally dropped a Mark VI nuclear bomb over Mars Bluff, South Carolina. The conventional explosives detonated. The nuclear core mercifully was stored separately. A family's home was destroyed. The crater is still there today. In 1961, a B-52 broke apart over Goldsboro, North Carolina, dropping 2 hydrogen bombs. One of them went through its arming sequence. Of the 4 safety mechanisms, 3 failed. A single switch prevented a 4-megaton nuclear detonation over American soil. 4 megatons. That's 250 times more powerful than Hiroshima. The explosion would have been visible from New York to Atlanta. Fallout would have contaminated the entire East Coast. And here's what they didn't tell us for decades. Some of these weapons were never recovered. At least 6 American nuclear bombs are still missing today. They call them empty quivers. Somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, in the swamps of Georgia, these weapons wait. But international incidents posed an even greater threat. Able Archer 83. In November 1983, just 2 months after Petrov's close call, the world nearly ended again. NATO launched a military exercise called Able Archer 83. It was designed to simulate the procedures for launching nuclear weapons in response to a Soviet attack. The Soviets didn't know it was an exercise. The KGB had been warning Moscow for years that America was planning a first strike. When they observed NATO forces practicing nuclear launch procedures, moving through authentic command protocols, Soviet leadership genuinely believed World War III had begun. Nuclear-armed aircraft were placed on alert. Submarine commanders were briefed. SS-20 missiles were moved to launch positions. DEFCON 1. We didn't know any of this at the time. It was only after Soviet defector Oleg Gordievsky provided intelligence that the West realized how close we had come. The world did not know how close we were to war. I'm not sure the world knows even now. President Reagan was reportedly shaken when he learned how the Soviets had interpreted the exercise. It fundamentally changed his approach to diplomacy. Exercise became almost real. But nuclear weapons weren't the only existential threat humanity faced. Something far more invisible nearly wiped us out. The Plague Years. In the 14th century, the Black Death killed between 75 and 200 million people. 1/3 to 1/2 of Europe's entire population, dead within a few years. But what most people don't realize is how close we came to total collapse. Cities fell silent. Fields went unharvested. The dead outnumbered the living in some regions. Entire family lines vanished from history, as if they had never existed. In some villages, there was no one left to bury the dead. Bodies rotted in homes, in streets, in churches. The social order completely broke down. Laws meant nothing when tomorrow was uncertain. Civilization itself hung by a thread. And here's what's truly terrifying. The bacterium that caused the Black Death, Yersinia pestis, still exists. It's still out there. In 2020, cases were reported in Mongolia and the American Southwest. Modern antibiotics can treat it now, but the bacteria is evolving. Drug-resistant strains have been detected. We assume modern medicine will protect us, but history shows how quickly that protection can fail. And the threat of pandemic has returned in our lifetime in ways our grandparents never imagined. Spanish Shadow. The 1918 Spanish flu killed more people than World War I. Estimates range from 50 to 100 million deaths. more than the Black Death in absolute numbers, 50 million dead. It struck in 3 waves. The second wave was the deadliest, and it killed in a way that terrified doctors. Young, healthy adults were dying within hours. Their lungs would fill with fluid so quickly they would literally drown in their own bodies. The virus triggered a cytokine storm. The stronger your immune system, the more violently it attacked you. Being healthy was a death sentence. Hospitals overflowed. Morgues ran out of coffins. Cities ran out of places to bury the dead. In Philadelphia, bodies were left on porches because there was no one to collect them. It was as if all the rules of nature had been suspended. Strong young people were dying while the elderly survived. We got lucky. The virus mutated into a less lethal form in its third wave. It burned itself out. But modern virologists have reconstructed the 1918 strain. They've studied its genetics. The same conditions that created it could emerge again. And next time, with global air travel, it would spread even faster. But diseases aren't the only invisible killers we've faced. Ozone crisis. In the 1980s, scientists discovered a hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica. The cause was CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, chemicals used in refrigerators and aerosol cans. Invisible doom. Without the ozone layer, ultraviolet radiation from the sun would reach Earth's surface unfiltered. Crops would fail. Plankton would die. The entire food chain would collapse. Cancer rates would skyrocket. Humans would be unable to go outside without protective gear. The timeline was estimated at decades, not centuries. We were slowly poisoning the very shield that protected all life on Earth. The sky itself was dying, and we had no idea. In 1987, something remarkable happened. The Montreal Protocol was signed. Nations around the world agreed to phase out CFCs. It was the first truly global environmental agreement, and it worked. The ozone layer is now slowly recovering. By 2066, it should be fully restored. This proves that humanity can respond to existential threats when we recognize them in time. The Montreal Protocol shows that when faced with a global threat, humans can act decisively and effectively. But not all threats have been handled so well. Toba catastrophe. 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano erupted in what is now Indonesia. The Toba eruption was the largest volcanic event in the last 2 million years. Volcanic winter survival. It ejected over 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. For comparison, Mount St. Helens ejected 1 cubic kilometer. The ash blocked out the sun. Global temperatures dropped by up to 15 degrees Celsius. A volcanic winter lasting years. Genetic studies suggest that human population may have crashed to as few as 10,000 individuals. Some estimates say as low as 3,000. Our entire species nearly went extinct. All 8 billion humans alive today may be descended from those few thousand survivors. That's why humans have remarkably low genetic diversity compared to other primates. We went through a bottleneck. We almost didn't make it. Every human alive carries the genetic scars of that ancient catastrophe. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Supervolcanoes haven't disappeared. Yellowstone sits on a massive magma chamber. It's erupted 3 times in the past 1 million years. It will erupt again. The question isn't if, but when. And what have we learned from all these close calls? Survivor's burden. We have survived nuclear near misses, pandemics that killed millions, volcanic catastrophes, and the silent poisoning of our atmosphere. Each time, humanity walked to the edge of oblivion and somehow stumbled back. The arc of history is long, but it bends toward survival only if we fight for it. But here's the pattern that should concern us. Almost every time we survived, it was because of luck, individual courage, or last-minute intervention. Petrov's gut feeling, Archipov's refusal, scientists noticing the ozone hole before it was too late. 1. Nuclear accidents we survived by chance. 2. Pandemics that could have been worse. 3. Environmental disasters we barely prevented. 4. Natural catastrophes we cannot control. The threats we face today are different. Climate change doesn't happen in a flash. It's a slow-motion catastrophe. Nuclear arsenals have shrunk but still number in the thousands. New technologies bring new risks. Artificial intelligence, bioengineering, and technologies we haven't invented yet will present challenges our grandparents never imagined. The question isn't whether humanity will face another existential threat. The question is whether we'll recognize it in time, whether we'll find our own Petrov, our own Arkhipov, our own moment of collective action like the Montreal Protocol. History suggests we can survive, but only if we remember how close we've come before. Stanislav Petrov died in 2017, largely unknown. No parades, no monuments, just a quiet death in a Moscow suburb. The man who saved billions of lives was forgotten by most of them. Forgotten hero, billions saved. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. The moments that could have ended everything didn't happen in grand battles or dramatic confrontations. They happened in bunkers, in submarines, in laboratories, in the silent mathematics of atmospheric chemistry. The apocalypse doesn't announce itself. It whispers. Every day you wake up is a day humanity survived another night of nuclear weapons on hair-trigger alert, of viruses mutating in animal populations, of geological forces building pressure beneath our feet. We are all Stanislav Petrov's children, living in a world he helped save. If you made it this far, comment Petrov's choice if this changed how you see our fragile existence. The truth is never comfortable, but it's always worth knowing. The next time someone tells you the world is ending, remember, it nearly has, many times, and yet here we are, still standing, still fighting, still choosing moment by moment to survive. History has more to teach us. Subscribe if you want to learn. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant.